Thank you for watching. My name's Glenn Morgan, and this is We the Governed. Today we're going to be talking about an example of how one person really did make a difference, influence millions of people, and change the country. So I don't usually do stories like this at We the Governed. This is a little different format. Let me know what you think about it. But I really wanted to talk about something that's fairly current in the news. About a week ago, major radio personality, Rush Limbaugh, passed away. And of course, that's been in the news. A lot of people are talking about their stories of Rush Limbaugh or how they knew him or the personal influence that he might have had in their lives. And I don't think I have as dramatic a story to explain as those, but I do have a personal story of my experience with Rush Limbaugh and what I saw, the influence that he had on those people who were around me. Now, even though I'm a fifth-generation Washingtonian, I grew up here, I love Washington. For some bizarre reason, I actually went back to New York City to go to college, and I went to Columbia University, which happens to just be just up a subway, a little bit further up Manhattan, from the studio where Rush Limbaugh was doing his radio broadcasts in the early 90s. And also, around that time, he had started kind of a television show where he needed a live audience. Now, I had heard Rush Limbaugh when I was in college because some of my roommates were playing him on the radio in between classes, and I'd hear him maybe before I'd go to track practice or go to cross-country practice because I was a big runner back then. And so that's how I first heard about him, but I really didn't pay that much attention. And it seemed to me that he was just a local radio show at the time. I don't know how widespread he was across the country, but he didn't influence me to become a conservative activist. I already was one. But what I enjoyed about his show at the time when I would hear it occasionally was just the humor, the funny stories, the little irreverence when he would do parodies, things like that. I really thought that was enjoyable. It was good radio, and it was fun to listen to. And remember, this is long before there was an internet or before there was email or cell phones or anything like that. So your ability to get media of any kind was relatively limited. It was radio or television. So around this time, because I was chair of the College Republicans at Columbia, I was contacted by the producers from the Rush Limbaugh show, and they were asking for people to come down and be part of the studio audience. They had to do the show. I don't remember if it was daily or how often they did it, but they would occasionally need people to come in and fill in the audience. And so we, as students at the school, had actually done this on other shows like the Donahue Show and other places. And so it was fairly normal for groups of students to decide to go down and get on these radio or these TV shows that you'd see sometimes. So we would hop in the subway and ride down there and get on the show. Sometimes it seemed that we'd have as many as 20 people there, sometimes just 6 or 7. I remember doing it several times. And Rush Limbaugh would do this television show, and it was a live audience broadcast. And then afterwards, he would come up to us several times, and this is the only times I ever actually spoke to him. And he would come up to us, and he would really be interested in what we thought of the show, what we liked, if there was topics that he thought that we might have thought that he was missing. It was just a real interesting interaction. He was always a good listener. He would actually really listen to any comments or feedback that we would give. And sometime around this time, I remember he sent his producers up to our dorm rooms. I just remember a couple of these people coming in, and we had conversations with them. A number of the college Republicans, we lived in some of this, we had kind of got suites together. And so we would share common spaces and then have this conversation with them. And that was the same thing that his producers would tell us, that, this is very much how Rush Limbaugh did things. Well, I didn't think too much of that at the time. It was an interesting thing to do. It was kind of fun to go down and do the show. But in the summers, I was always happy to get out of New York City, and I would go home and try to make as much money as I could so I could afford to come back to school the next fall. And so one of my jobs that I had was working in a cabinet shop. I'd been doing that for years, ever since I was in high school. And so building cabinets or sanding face frames or spraying cabinets, whatever, or installing them in homes. And it was my uncle's cabinet shop, a little custom cabinet shop that he had in Auburn at the time. And used to be that when I was in his shop, he'd always just play music in the background because it's fairly tedious behavior. You're there sanding or doing relatively manual labor, but oftentimes we have music in the background. And I remember coming back one summer, and instead of music, it was Rush Limbaugh playing in the background. And I was kind of surprised because my uncle had really not done anything. No, I'd never heard him talk about politics other than how much all the politicians were a bunch of idiots and how much he didn't like politics. And I don't even think he voted. I mean, he had just been a non-political person his whole life. And suddenly he had started listening to Rush Limbaugh. And it had changed his entire worldview. And he told me, how he loved the humor, he loved the irreverence, and he really connected with Rush Limbaugh, this guy that I had met, this talk show host that I had met in Manhattan, and was influencing my uncle running this little cabinet shop 3,000 miles away in Auburn, and it changed his world, and at least as far as how he viewed it when it came to politics. And that was a real interesting experience because my presumption, and I met many people like this over the years, their entire worldview started to be influenced and changed by this one guy in Manhattan, Rush Limbaugh, who was willing to go out and say what he believed, speak truth to power, have some humor, have some irreverence, and really truly make an impact. Now today, to some extent, there's a lot of Rush Limbaughs out there. There's a lot of people out there doing their radio shows. There's a lot of people doing podcasts. There's a lot of people with websites. And many of them have been influenced or even inspired by Rush Limbaugh. And I'd like to just focus on that element of this story. Obviously, Rush Limbaugh's died, and of course, the leftists and the big government folk have danced on his grave, and they've said just the most horrible things about him. Something that, frankly, I think he would have known they would do and would have laughed about, just knowing that that's the behavior that the left would inevitably have. But it is a good example how one person in New York City doesn't even know who's listening to his show, is able to make an influence on people thousands of miles away, just like my uncle, and change how they view the world, convince them to vote for the first time, and get them more involved. And that's another example of how one person truly can make a difference. So thank you for listening to my story today, and I appreciate any feedback that you might have. Please leave that in the comments section below. If you like what you see here, feel free to subscribe and share. And the one thing I want to emphasize is that the future truly does belong to those who show up. And many years ago, some guy named Rush Limbaugh decided to show up. You too can make a difference where you live.